Uh, Welcome to the Dublin Conversations. Hello, would you like to introduce yourself?
G'day, Andy. Yeah, I'm Ross Monaghan. I'm an academic here at Deakin University in Melbourne, Australia. As you know, we've caught up a few times, which is great when you've been out to Australia. I've been at Deakin about 20 years, teaching both undergraduate and postgraduate communications. Students have been involved with some state government and some federal government campaigns and programs throughout my time at Deakin as well, including the Defence Department, some issues with emergency services, training politicians on social media. And before I became an academic, I was the chief executive officer of the mobile phone industry in Australia. So I was the chief lobbyist for the mobile phone industry back in the day when people were concerned about mobile phones. You'd probably remember that.
Indeed, I do, Ross. Indeed, I do.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. And it's re-emerged with 5G as well. People are thinking that there might be some health effects there. And before all of that, I worked for Optus, which is a big mobile phone company here in Australia, and BHP is where I started my comms career. Worked in Australia and Canada, and had a brief time as a journalist. So pretty varied career, but very interesting.
so very extensive career in communications. Let's look at the future of the communications industry. Let's go
Mm.
start sharing a screen here and start our journey. Okay, so it provides a sort of context for why we're having these conversations, Ross, and
Mm.
why the Dublin conversations. So we're both living in an era where we're witnessing paradoxical change in communications of both greater fragmentation, but also convergence, and that we need to rethink existing ideas like advertising, journalism, marketing, public relations, and more, and grow them or replace them with better ones. And yet we have an immense opportunity with new knowledge from a whole range of disciplines to create a better way of thinking and doing in our industry. So we're posing the question, can we co-create new ideas to do our jobs better and rise to the challenge of tackling
Mm.
society's wider issues of brain distrust, divisive tribalism, or not being able to come together to tackle our big issues? And what if we could unlearn some of these existing thinking that we operate within? And what does better look like? So let's have a Dublin conversation and take the 5 steps to what we call the Dublin window that enables you to see a bigger view of the world and step outside maybe the boundaries of existing thinking, existing ways of going forward. Step
Mm.
one is that we need to create confidence to be purposeful. And by confidence, we don't necessarily mean use it in its meaning of, say, an inflated sense of self-belief, but more in its statistical meaning of a correlation between the probability of it being happening and what you perceive it to be. And so
Mm.
the foundation of the Dublin Windows universe is the need to create confidence to coexist, cooperate, or collaborate by managing perceptions around your future behaviors. And confidence is vital in your consciousness of what you perceive to be reality. You need to also be confident in who you are and your purpose and purposefulness, confident in others to help not harm you, confidence in others' purposefulness and how you help not hurt them, and there's what we call zeitgeist confidence, that a mood that leads to maybe peace, wars, financial success, failure, and more. And so we recognize that confidence is critical, although there's much we've got to learn about it. And we're suggesting that purpose and being purposeful makes it easier to create confidence by being more coherent and compelling. Uh, Ross, any views on that sort of insights?
Yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there, is my first
Yeah.
observation. But look, one of the things that you did say that I think it was on the first slide talking about, no, we need to co create new ideas. I would really love to see the industry come together to actually have conversations about these issues, which is why I'm a really big fan of the Dublin conversations. I think, working through a lot of these issues, sharing knowledge, sharing information about how we operate, what's working well, I think is really important. Harking back to my days in the mobile phone industry, when we were dealing with issues, we discovered that by working together, as an industry, we were able to address issues much more effectively than individual organisations. So I think, coming together on those non-competitive issues, and I absolutely acknowledge that there are lots of competitive issues there that people watching this will be thinking about. But on those non-competitive issues, I think coming together is really, really important, and I'd encourage people to do that. Look, confidence and purpose really important. We've done a few sessions and talked about this before. Understanding your purpose and understanding your organisation's purpose is really, really important. And I'm really interested in this definition of confidence. Statistically, how can you gauge whether your perceptions are correct or not? I'm throwing that back to you.
I think that's one of the questions that we need to take on board and explore with others going forward, Ross. Some valuable insight you've shared there.
Yeah, look, I think our perceptions of the future and purpose and perceptions and needing to get a check on reality to see whether statistically our perceptions of what's going to happen are they correct is really, really important. And as a practitioner and academic, I know that there'll be a lot of people thinking about, well, how do we actually practically do that? How can we actually gauge whether what we're thinking about particular issues is actually accurate or not?
Well, you mentioned reality then. Reality itself for each and every one of us is a perception. And therefore, as I say, we need to recognize that and establish that as a foundation stone that after breathing, eating, using your senses, managing perceptions around future behaviors is perhaps one of the most critical of human functions. So if we can move on to the next step, which is that if you're working in the communications industry, you tend to operate within a silo of thinking. It might be advertising, communications, public relations, and more. And we need a new universe. And we're suggesting there about being purpose and purposeful can provide that sort of a center for our worldview. And in order then to get engaged with others, influenced by the work of leading behavioral psychologists such as Professor Daniel Kahneman, there's 5 key sort of what we call rules, or known as heuristics, about how you succeed in engaging with others. And so we in the Dublin Conversation believes these 5 dimensions frame any campaign of interaction. And the first is being known and noticed. So if you know of something, you're more likely to say yes to it.
Yeah.
If you like it, and like it is not just affective liking, but can be respect, admiration, and even liking not to like something, as long as it provokes a strong emotional engagement, can be a critical dimension. Trust. Front of mind, even though you may be known, unless you're front of mind when people are making decisions, there's a danger you may be overlooked. And lastly, being talked about, social proof. So these 5 things provide a framework that if you need to socially interact, you need to get one or more of these to address. What do you think of this idea?
Yeah, look, I really love this, and whilst I'm not a practitioner now, as an academic, I guess my constituency is my students and potential students as well, and I've used this, and I consciously actually think about this step in my work as an academic with quite a large group of students that I deal with, because sometimes if you're looking at the course content, you're not sure who your lecturer is. So thinking about getting my students, how do they get to know me or know who their lecturer is, getting noticed, do they like me or not, do they trust me on these issues, getting front of mind for these students for the issues that I want them to deal with is really important as well. And I'm not so sure I want my students being talked about, but in the broader context for communication practitioners, that's obviously going to be really important, and I think will be driven by those 4 preceding points as well. So I think it's a really good model, and I'm actually kind of using it myself.
Yeah. And I think you've highlighted there, Ross, that the whole of these tools can be used at an individual, campaign, organisation, or community level. So moving on then to step three, that how do you then connect with people to realise one or more of those five rules? And the
Mm,
Dublin Conversations has evolved what was called the PESO model of paid, earned, shared, and owned
yeah.
to what it calls opens. But opens is profoundly different in that opens is about choices. These are not channels, but strategic choices you identify when connecting with others. So O is not just own media channels, but your own behaviors, reputation, even
Mm,
spending time with someone. Paid for embraces advertising and anything else you need to pay for. Earned includes the traditional areas of earned media coverage, but also search engine optimization and word of mouth. And nudge is a new dimension about how you make it easier to influence people by making it the choices available to them and the choices you prefer easier for them. And lastly,
mm.
shared, and that's both online and offline. So if you need to connect with someone, these are the sort of five choices and provide a framework for your choices. Any thoughts there, Ross?
Yeah, look, one of the things that comes to mind here is that, I think when we're dealing with communication, it's not always just about communication. I think, you can say that you are a good organisation or a good individual, but I think actions speak louder than words. So I really like the five opens choices model here, where it's not just all about communications, it's about the choice of how you act and communicate as well. And I think that's absolutely vitally important, because just as somebody going up to you and saying, hey, I'm a good friend, it's not really going to make you want to be their friend, because to be a good friend, you need to both you demonstrate that you're going to be a good friend. And I think the same is true for organizations. There are lots of organizations out there that just communicate and say that we're environmentally responsible, or that we work with communities, but it's actually those communication organizations that say that and do that as well, that I think actually get that cut through and get really good engagement. So I think the five opens choices is a good way to think about this.
Yeah. And then we move on then to step four, which is that your reality is being created by what's called emergence, that things emerge around you. And a
Mm,
very simple model here, what's called the listen, connect, do model, explains how we think and act. So we listen, and we listen not just with our eyes, but all the senses. We then make connections. And then we then develop these connections, and it may be a development of an idea through to something tangible, an action. And listen, connect, do. And it's a continuous loop of listen, connect, do, feedback from your doing, and so on. And that the engine for this is purpose, which drives the vehicle of the listening, connect, doing around. That we need to listen to more to bottom up as well as top down. And also,
mm,
what's emerged is a label called comms, which is widely used within the industry, but lacks any formal definition. And the Dublin Conversation proposing that we need a new label to describe what we do. Comms could be a candidate, and
mm,
it's something that's bigger than just communications, as you referred to there, but also includes managing behaviours, influencing
mm,
behaviours, being purposeful, and building social cohesion. And there's a proposed definition of comms as how you create confidence within yourself and with others to exist, coexist, cooperate, or collaborate by managing perceptions around your future behaviours, which is fundamental to being purposeful. And also,
mm,
what's emerged is that from the field of sociology, sociologists can now identify sort of universal laws of human behavior, one of which is that 2 out of 3 people will help a stranger, but also 1 out of 3 doesn't. So there are two prime instincts that could be at work here of what the Dublin Conversations call we-led thinking, where your instinct and reaction is to think of others first, the collective interest first, and
mm,
me-led thinking, where it's your immediate reaction is to think of self-interest first. Obviously, it's a dynamic and shaped by context, but Dublin Conversations believes that there's potential here to develop sort of distinct philosophies around a we-led approach, which could describe a public relations perspective, and a me-led approach, which could describe an advertising perspective.
mm.
Again, Russ, any thoughts on these ideas?
Yeah, look, I like the connect, do, sorry, listen, connect, and do model. I think, with purpose at the center of it, knowing what you're trying to achieve is really important. Listening, so important. In communication and understanding your purpose and trying to drive change. Absolutely. I mean, I mean, most of us have heard that, we've got two ears and one mouth, and we should use them in that sort of ratio. I often mention that to my students. One of the points, you're talking about comms being defined as how you create confidence within yourself and others coexist, and managing perceptions about your future behaviours. When I read that, I can't but help think about, what the psychologists talk about. The best predictor of future behaviour is past behaviour as well, and getting back to how we're behaving, both organisationally and individually in the present, is going to have an impact on how people perceive what we're going to be doing in the future. So look, I think this reflection, empathy, collaboration model is a great way to think about so many parts of business, and particularly communication.
And then with regards to step 5, is that our society functions where we need to have trust in others, not to coexist, cooperate, and collaborate. There's a spectrum model here developed by Professor Jim McNamara, where of the distrust-trust continuum. Some people, one extreme, are distrusting and disengaged. Other people, the other extreme, are over-trusting. And when you're over-trusting, not only leads to maybe naivety, but also is the basis for the Dublin conversation beliefs, prejudice and bias, that you only trust a very narrow worldview. And that critical for human society to function is this middle zone, what the Dublin conversations labels the purposeful trust zone, where you need to be open to understanding to others, to coexist and cooperate and collaborate. So that leads really to the thought that in future, anyone working within the communications industry, it's not only about how you influence another, but at the same time, how you also invest in social cohesion, because without it, we cannot operate. So, let's say going forward, communication practices need to both earn confidence and also invest in social cohesion. Any thoughts there, Ross?
Yeah, well, social cohesion. We've seen a lot of unrest in the past decade, and yeah, look, I think communicators have an important role to play in social cohesion, and look, I completely understand how it has a huge impact on trust as well. I think so many of the activities that we have seen in the past few years where there isn't a lot of social cohesion. I'm not going to name any organisation or countries, but I can't but help think that so much of this has been driven by communicators who are trying to stir up issues which are to the advantage of their industry sectors. Look, I'm not sure, and I'm not convinced that is a good long-term strategy. In fact, I'm convinced of the opposite. I think if you look at the research, those organisations and governments that act ethically, engage, are truthful, and are better in the longer term. And I think, one of the other things I think about at this point, and the scale up the top here, is skepticism. I am very concerned about, the future of journalism, which I think plays a really, really important role. I know a lot of journalists, PR practitioners, one's the dark side, one isn't, depending on, which side of the fence you're on. You might see the other side as the dark side, but I think, coexisting there and understanding that this skepticism is actually good for society and social cohesion is really, really important. So again, look, there's a lot to unpack in all of this, but absolutely think that this is a great model going forward.
And then really last, so taking on 5 steps where we're provided sort of a framework of thinking that can explain how we socially interact, without using any of the terms of advertising, communications, journalism, marketing, public relations, and so on. And again, that's not to say to do away with them, but the potential to revitalize them, reframe them, or replace them with better ideas. So you've gone through the 5 steps. How do you feel now about what does better look like? Do you feel more confident that going forward about addressing, developing new ideas for the communications industry?
Look, I must say, look, I think I've still got a lot of skepticism in whether the industry can do it. I hope it can and will. I think there's a lot of self-interest within the industry. But coming together, I've seen it myself. I've seen the amazing results when people work together rather than against each other. So I think the 5 steps, I'm confident that it's an approach that will work. Am I confident that industry will get behind it? I'm less confident about that.
And is there one or more things the Dublin conversations should be doing different?
Just more of the same, getting out there, talking to more people about these, creating more conversations, I think is really important. I know you and everyone at the Dublin Conversations are doing a great job. Wherever I can, I let my students know, let practitioners know about it. I think these conversations are great for a better, stronger industry sector that can really help address some of the issues that the world is facing at the moment, not only global climate change, COVID issues, pandemic issues. So many of these things revolve around what we do as communicators. And I think if we get together, we can have some really, really important conversations and drive some really important change. So just more conversations is great.
I think you've addressed question 3 there. So, Ross, Matt, I really appreciate you sparing the time, your thoughts and wisdom, and collectively, as you say, growing stronger together. So, Ross, thank you very much there. I'll stop the conversation, stop the share, and thank you again from the Dublin Conversations for your kindness now.
No problem. Happy to help the Dublin Conversations and